Go ahead and welcome. Welcome to next little session here. My name is Bob Flynn. I'm a technical instructor here at Palo Alto Networks, and today we're going to be talking about routing and best practices for routing when it comes to Prisma Access. We're going to be talking a little bit about routing in general, some of the routing options that are available with Prisma Access, and some ways we can actually create different exceptions to our routing types and our routing examples. So, a quick little overview of routing with Prisma Access. The first thing to know is that all of the different components, all the pieces and parts of Prisma Access, the mobile user security processing nodes or MUSPNs, the remote network SPNs, the service connections, corporate access nodes, all of these have public facing IP addresses for mobile users and users in branch offices and things like that to be able to get to those security processing nodes and get inspected by PAN-OS and do all the things that you're used to with, say, PAN-OS on a on-premise firewall, decryption and user ID and app ID and threat protections and all of those sort of things. Wildfire, the whole thing. But they also have back-end IP addresses that you as an admin don't necessarily have direct knowledge of. You can find these IP addresses, but they're right up front. But all the devices are connected through these back-end IP addresses. And we do use EIGRP to interior gateway routing protocol to be able to pick the best path between any 2 points there. So if you have a situation where maybe you have a mobile user connecting to one security processing node that maybe needs to talk to a authentication server in a data center, we will make sure that the path to get to the data center and to that, say, authentication server, DNS server, whatever that service might be, is going to be the best path to get there, as well as if that mobile user needed to talk to somebody maybe in a remote network. We want to make sure that we route the fastest, most effective way to get there. Now, your options that you have for communication between users in one remote network to users in another remote network, or mobile users to a remote network, etc., or the use of a service connection to get down to a data center, all depend upon your licensing. And there's lots of different licensing models we offer these days. The two that give you the ability to have these service connections, if there's an existing data center where you might have an authentication server or a DNS server or something like that, that users require access to, whether they're mobile users or whether they're users, say, in a branch office that need to get back to the main data center to authenticate. We have two different licensing models for that. For our mobile users, we have what we call our ZTNA. It's our Zero Trust Network Architecture. And when it comes to users in a branch office, what we would call a remote network, if they need to get back to a data center, then we have the enterprise licensing format for them. So these give mobile users or users in the branch office the ability to go through a service connection to a data center. Of course, your mobile users and your users in these branch offices, these remote networks, as we call them, do have the ability, of course, to get out to the internet and get out to the web and get out to their internet-based SaaS applications, while passing through our security layer, where we're doing all of our security inspection on all of this traffic, wildfire and threat protection and URL filtering and app ID and user ID and all that great stuff. Some customers may require the ability to say, have users in one remote network, or think branch office, storefront, that sort of thing, talk to users in another one. Or maybe mobile users, instead of going out to the internet, they need to talk to users inside of an office. If that's the case and you want to do that securely through Prisma Access, we do have what we call our Interconnect add-on. That's part of our enterprise license, which includes mobile users and remote networks, branch office users. And in addition to that, we can do the Interconnect add-on, which then allows those different users in those different remote networks, our mobile users, to talk to each other or branch offices or that sort of thing. Otherwise, the only path for a mobile user to get out, say, to a branch office would be if there were specific rules to allow inbound traffic to a remote network, and a user went out to the internet and came back in. We do mesh together all of the remote network SPNs and this service center corporate access nodes, the SCCANs, the RNSPNs. And any remote user in a branch office that needs to get to corporate access node or get to some service that's there is going to take the fastest route. As I said, we do internal EIGRP. And if we're doing the net interconnect add-on, of course, getting from one branch to another branch or to a third branch or down the service connection or whatever, we of course can get you there the fastest way possible, assuming you have that net interconnect add-on that we were just talking about. By default, a user in a branch office or a remote network that might need to, say, talk to let's say an LDAP server or a radius server, some sort of authentication service, DNS, whatever the case may be, it needs to get to a service connection, as long as they've got the enterprise license with the service connection, of course, would go to the service connection and the data center that is closest to them. But we do have the ability, as we'll see a little bit later, to actually have some control over that. Oh, somebody corrected me on the protocol we were talking about, IGP. would be the correct term. By the way, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but we will have time for questions and answers and things like that at the end of this presentation. So if you do have questions, there is a Q&A function. And after my little talk, we'll get to any questions you might have. Mobile users, if you have that interconnect licensing, and a mobile user may need to talk to, say, a user in a branch office or down a remote network, they would normally go straight out to the internet. We can have them use a corporate access node as basically a router to be able to route them to a branch office or remote network instead of going out to the internet. Again, we have that interconnect license to do that. Which brings up an interesting thing about these corporate access nodes. These corporate access nodes are not just a connection up into Prisma Access for a data center. It's also a connection for mobile users to access routing information to get to different branch offices. So corporate access node can act as a router. Which means that if you have mobile users in different places inside your enterprise, you could certainly have mobile users that are in different geographic areas. You know, we call these regions in Prisma Access, but they roughly break down into continents. We have our North American region and say our European region. If a mobile user, say in Europe, needs to talk to a user in a branch office in Europe, they need to hit a CAN, a corporate access node, to be able to get the routes to get there. So the way you deploy these corporate access nodes can make a great difference in the end user experience that you get. If my mobile user who's destined to this branch office, you know, they're both in Europe. Let's say we got I don't know, somebody in Paris talking to somebody in Munich. I hope I spelled that correctly. Then they need to be able to bounce off a corporate access node to get the route to get back there. Well, if the corporate access node, the closest one to them, is in a totally different region, a totally different continent, then they basically gotta go halfway around the world to get a route to say, oh, by the way, this user's 250 miles away from you, but you had to go on a 20,000 mile round trip to get that information to go there. So even if you don't have a data center that requires a service connection in Europe, in this example, like you did in North America, it makes sense to deploy a corporate access node tagged just as a router for your regional users in in this example, Europe, they'll say, hey, you know what? To get from point A here on the right to point B on the left, let's go the shortest way. So let's deploy a corporate access node in that region, because we have users in that region that need to talk to mobile users that need to talk to people in branch offices. Now, I can do that even though I don't have any sort of data center in Europe. When you have the global licensing for, say, enterprise, which would include mobile users and remote networks, you get multiple service connections you can deploy, which means it's already built in and baked into the subscription. May as well deploy these to give you regionally, to give you the best performance possible. When it comes to routing modes, we have this idea of hot potato, cold potato routing, or what we call it, default routing and hot potato routing. Our default routing model is that we will leverage default routes, BGP routes, our internal routing, all that sort of stuff to get a user from point A to point B as fast as they can. And this is especially true when we're talking about that model where we may have a user in one branch office talking to a user in another branch office, or a mobile user talking to a user in a branch office. By default, we will leverage the Prisma Access cloud infrastructure, which has, great performance, gig speed, slowest path to get to where you need to go, that sort of thing. But you are going to run into some customers that maybe have existing SD-WAN deployments. So if we're to find WANs, whether they're using a third party or whether they're using Prisma SD-WAN, you may have customers that have some sort of a legacy BGP infrastructure to where one branch office can talk back to a data center to get to another branch office, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they may not want to leverage the default routing that we do. They may say, hey, you know what? We've got our own routing infrastructure that we want to use. So dump everything to us. You can choose either or, and the way this kind of works out, if we kind of look at an example here, we have different corporate access nodes leading down to different data centers in different areas. Got one in Asia, Europe, one in the US, one in North America. And if I have a user in one branch office, say a user in a branch in the US that needs to talk to a user in Europe, in another branch office, the path would basically go from the user in the branch office in North America up the service connection, where they would find a route to say, hop over to the European service connection, go down the European service connection, and you'll find your user there in that branch office in Europe. And of course, then return traffic would go the same way, would follow the same path back. Well, that would be how we do this by default. What we call our default routing or cold potato. We're going to leverage our routing infrastructure because in most cases, it's the fastest, best way to get there. Well, a customer that might have a more extensive BGP routing install that pre-exists, they say, you know what? Let me take care of that. If I got a user in a branch office needs to talk to another user in a branch office, let me send them into Prisma Access and have Prisma Access push them back down into my routing infrastructure and let me take care of this. So let my infrastructure take care of routing, which would mean, if a user was going out to the internet, well, they go straight out through our security processing nodes and all that sort of stuff. But if they're going to be talking to somebody else somewhere inside that customer's infrastructure, a user in one branch office talking to a user in another branch office, a mobile user talking to a user in a branch office, etc., they would leverage the customer's routing infrastructure, not ours. So you do have that option. The default is use Prisma Access. Otherwise, you can say use hot potato routing. When it comes to routing protocols supported by Prisma Access, there are two. Static routes, where basically we can advertise, for instance, what IP addresses are available, say at a branch office. Let's say network X, and what IPs are available, say at a data center, say network Y. And we can advertise those as using static routes and just tell Prisma Access when we deploy a service connection or a remote network, what subnets are available in that connection. We do also support BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, Border Gateway Protocol. That's it. No support for OSPF or RIP or anything like that. The corporate infrastructure at these branch offices or these data centers may have implementations of that, but we either use a static route to say, well, to get to your destination, you get on this service connection, or your user you're looking for is in this branch office, this remote network, or you're going out to the internet. Or we can plug into BGP, which would allow us to do, for instance, the hot potato routing. We can have our nodes peer with existing BGP deployments with on-premise equipment. If we do want to do that, we just go to our BGP tab And we can put in things such as our ASs that we want to peer with, IPv4 and IPv6 addresses for those, any sort of authentication that we want to do. What we are doing with Prisma Access is just peering with the existing BGP deployment, so that these peers can update our routes to our equipment in Prisma Access. They'll tell us how to get from one point in Prisma Access to, say, another point within Prisma Access through the customer's infrastructure. Much like our on-premise next generation firewalls, we can integrate with BGP. We can perform some limited functionality as a peer advertising, routes, things like that also. But at the heart of it, we're a security device, not a router. We can typically integrate sufficiently with the customer's BGP integration with existing dedicated routers and things like that, and get by fine. But our main job is a security device. So there are some limitations as to the numbers of routes we can support and things like that. As you deploy Prisma Access and you start looking at the status menu, we'll see how your deployment's going and how everything's looking. Under the service connections, which is where you would be peering with on-premise customer deployed BGP implementations, you have the ability to view the BGP status, to make sure you see the peers and the communities, and you can see the routes coming in and that sort of thing. So that's where you can double check to see what you're doing there. Under your service connection network details, you can see the BGP status. Now we have a functionality that actually creates exceptions or exemptions to our static routes or our BGP routes that we learn. And it's called traffic steering. So we have the ability to basically say, well, we got static routes or BGP routing, and it says go this way or that way to get to destination A or destination B. But we want to create some exceptions to that. Say, for example, you want to send some traffic that might be normally bound for the internet, going through a security processing node. For one reason or another, you would rather that go down a service connection to a data center, to an on-premise firewall in the data center before it goes out to the internet. So you want to be able to peel off or create exceptions for traffic that would normally just go straight out to Prisma Access, not to the internet. You can do that using traffic steering. And using traffic steering, we have the ability to be able to create exceptions to routing based on not just destination IP addresses, which is, what routing does is it looks at the destination IP address in a packet and says, oh, well, to get there, this is your next hop. Instead, we can look at things like applications, we can look at users, we can combine that information with destination IP addresses and port numbers and things like that. And now we can steer traffic in different directions and make exceptions to this routing based upon that information. So this gives us another option besides our native routing and or our hot potato, cold potato static routing, to be able to steer or direct some traffic in other directions. So we can illustrate this pretty easily. Again, let's say we have our mobile users. Users sit at home, needs to go out and to the internet. The default behavior of Prisma Access would say, all right, mobile user, you need to go out to the internet. The way you get there is through Prisma Access, through a mobile user SPN, where we can do all of our traffic inspection and keep you safe. And then, we'll send you out to the internet. Well, for whatever reason, let's say, well, there's some traffic that's fine to follow this path, but there's other traffic I would like to first go to a firewall or whole security stack back at a data center, back at my headquarters, before they go out to the internet. So I want to steer them in a different direction. Well, traffic steering gives us the ability to do just that. Either all of the traffic, and perhaps the use case here might be a customer that is currently deploying Prisma Access, has not set up any sort of security policy rules or anything like that within Prisma Access yet. So in order to get their traffic inspection, they have to go back. That could be a use case, or maybe it's specific applications. Maybe for specific traffic that might have personally identifiable information or something like that. I want that to go through my security stack back at my data center where, maybe have a DLP solution. Maybe I'm not going to use the DLP solution within Prisma Access. And different scenarios like that. So we have the ability to be able to differentiate traffic for traffic steering by things other than just destination IP address, which, as I said, what normal routing is. So we have the ability to look at source IP addresses, users, destination addresses, of course. Basic routing does that. URLs, URL categories, service types, which is port numbers. And we can then create a traffic steering rule that says your next hop or your destination is going to be in one direction or another one. Say direct out to the internet, which would be what Prisma Access does by default, or down a service connection to a data center, or maybe give them multiple data centers that they could go to. In other words, it could be a primary and backup data center, both in North America, or I got a data center in North America and one in Europe. You can use either one. So the way you would do that to choose a different destination to steer the traffic in a different direction is first you would create a service connection group, and you give the group a name and you'd stick your different service connections in there, whether it's a group of one or a group of many. And you can have multiple different destinations, different service connection groups, data center groups that you want to use. And then it's just a matter of using our policy-based forwarding rules to do our traffic steering to forward either out to the internet, or other rules may say forward to one of these data center groups that I've created. Now, of course, the default is going to be sent out to the internet. So really the idea of these traffic steering rules is when I don't want to go directly to the internet, then I create a traffic steering rule to do that. And we're going to see that as a separate tab for traffic steering, where we set up all this information. So a use case of this, if I had a mobile user that needed to get out to the internet, they would typically bounce through Prisma Access, go straight out to the internet. Maybe I have, some sort of application that I want to go in a different direction. Maybe for my users that are going to Office 365 and stuff like that, that's fine. Like my SaaS applications, that's cool. But for whatever reason, I want other traffic to hit a data center instead. So I want them to go in this direction. And then from the data center out to the internet. So using things like Office 365 for applications or users or IP addresses or things like that, I can then differentiate traffic and give them different paths to go through. And as I said, send some traffic through Prisma Access, other traffic down a service connection before it goes out to the internet, and then maybe some other traffic directly out to the internet through Prisma Access. I've got the options to do all of those sort of things using this traffic steering, along with a combination of default routes, BGP, hot potato routing, all of those sort of things mixed in together. So lots of different options there when it comes to routing with Prisma Access. And hopefully you kind of learn some of the options and some of the use cases and some of the reasons why you may want to choose one over the other. But by far, the most prolific use case is static routing, down service connections for remote users and mobile users, down a service connection to a data center, and everything else just goes straight out to the internet through Prisma Access, flowing through a security processing node. That is the most common. Now, we have a little bit of time for some questions and answers.